Hey, it's David of Strong by Lead. Thanks for tuning in. And in this video, I want to discuss a calming topic. What is the one thing that you can look at, maybe even reduce, manage, evaluate if you're trying to lose more weight? Let's say you're struggling to lose weight. You think you're dieting pretty well. You think you're pretty strict. What's one thing you can look at? Dietary fat. If you haven't looked at dietary fat, let's try looking at dietary fat for a couple of reasons. Not because I'm an enemy of dietary fat. I love fat. I love butter. I love nuts. I love avocado. I love sour cream. But we have to look at fat in a more objective, scientific way, clinical way. First and foremost, 1 gram of fat has double the amount of calories as 1 gram of protein and 1 gram of carbohydrate. And as we know, when it comes to how much you weigh, the number one thing that matters is how much you eat in terms of energy and calories. 100 grams of fat will give you 900 calories, whereas 100 grams of protein and carbohydrates will give you 400. So more than double for the same amount of volume and weight. That could be problematic when the body wants to manage its weight simply by the energy coming in and the energy coming out. So that is really the objective, number-based reasoning of why we want to look at fat in an objective way. From a metabolic standpoint, there are certain consequences. They're not all negative consequences. There are consequences, objective consequences of dietary fat. Number one, the body has an unlimited storage capacity for fat, meaning that the body's fat tissue, the adipose tissue, can expand almost indefinitely, which is why you see people who are 600, 700, 800 pounds overweight, because they're mostly made out of fat. Research shows most people who are, by the time they're 2, have already developed over 90% of their fat tissue. So when people say that they're going to burn off their fat cells, that's technically incorrect, because you can't really kill off your fat cells. You could probably kill off a small proportion, but you can't kill off as much as people think, because what happens is you shrink the fat cells. You've had those fat cells since even before you could remember what your name was. It just expands and shrinks based on all your dieting efforts. And here's kind of the discouraging and depressing part, but you still shouldn't quit based off of this data. If you've struggled to lose weight for as long as you can remember, maybe you've had a punch, you're most likely going to struggle with your weight for the rest of your life. It's going to be easier for you to gain the weight. It's going to be harder for you to lose, especially after subsequent attempts. And it's going to require more diligence for you to keep that weight off over time versus somebody who's naturally lean, such as me. I'm naturally lean. I'm not really going to have an issue with losing weight versus somebody who struggled with weight when they were younger. The way the body stores fat is nearly identical to the way that the body finds fat in food. Triglycerides. The body stores fat, dietary fat, as triglycerides in adipose tissue, compared to proteins and carbohydrates. The body has to break down the proteins into amino acids to store them and to use them. The body has to break down carbohydrates into simple sugars to store them as glycogen or to burn them off as energy. Because your body has to convert them into different forms or break them down into simpler compounds, proteins and carbohydrates have this thing called thermic effect of food, which means that the body has to use calories in order to extract the calories from those foods. So let's say, for example, proteins have a thermic effect of about 30% or 30 to 40%, meaning that if you eat 100 calories through protein, let's say chicken, the net gain in calories is only going to be 60 to 70 calories versus carbohydrates, which might have a thermic effect of food of about 15 to 20%, and fat. Can you guess what the thermic effect of fat is? Almost zero. Your body uses almost 0 calories in order to break down, metabolize, and store fat, which makes it problematic for people who are trying to lose weight if they have a high fat intake. But fat intake isn't the only thing. After you look at fat, that doesn't necessarily mean you should cut out fat or reduce it. After you look at fat and you try to evaluate it, track how much fat you're eating, the next thing you want to look at is how much carbohydrates am I eating? And the reason is, when you have a diet that's both high in carbohydrates and high in fat, you're setting up an environment for the promotion of fat storage, because the way the body processes nutrients, it works on a hierarchy. Your body prioritizes metabolizing carbohydrates above anything else, because increased blood sugar. So when you eat carbohydrates, your body releases this hormone called insulin. It releases insulin because your body will break down those carbohydrates into simple sugars. Those simple sugars will lift blood sugar. The insulin's job is to return the blood sugar down the baseline, because increased blood sugar is very toxic to the body. Don't ask me why our bodies have designed systems like this, why our body have designed metabolic processes that are naturally toxic to us. It just is. So the body wants to do its best to bring down blood sugar. The only thing more dangerous than increased blood sugar is alcohol in the blood alcohol content. So when you have a diet that's high in both fats and carbohydrates, the fats are going to get shuttled towards storage because, number one, remember, your body hardly has to do any work to store the fat. And then on top of that, its blood sugar is up. So it wants to get rid of the blood sugar first. So it's going to store the fat, put the fat on the back burner, and do its best and prioritize getting the blood sugar down first. The standard American diet is characterized by high fat, high sugar, and high salt. Those three things, which is why you see increased prevalence and incidence of diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease. Those three things are exacerbated, made worse, actually, and preventable by a diet, or exacerbated and made worse by a diet that's high in those three compounds, salt, fat, and sugar, and can be prevented or greatly mitigated by controlling any of those variables. So if you have a diet that's high in fat, such as a ketogenic diet, you want to have low carbohydrates. If you have a diet that's high in carbohydrates, such as a diet that's geared towards high performance, like elite athletes, and I'm not saying that only all elite athletes should be on high carbohydrate diets. I know people who perform very well on a low carbohydrate diet. Are they Olympic and professional level? No. I've never worked with an Olympic or a professional athlete before, but I know general fitness clientele can fare very well on a low carbohydrate diet. If you're on a high carbohydrate diet, you want your fat to be pretty low. Pretty low can be very subjective and relative. This is a personalized recommendation isn't required. And if you want to figure out what type of fat is going to be good for you, because it's going to be a little bit different for everybody, but for the most part, there's a range. When you are on a high carbohydrate diet, let's say you have carbohydrates at 60%, protein should be about, about 20%, and fat should be about 20%. When you're on a moderate carbohydrate diet at 40%, fat should be about 30%, and protein should be about 30%. When you're on a ketogenic diet, you're getting maybe 60% of your energy from fats, about 20% from protein, less than 10% from carbohydrates. All right. So I hope that gave you a lot more information on what's one thing that you could look at. Dietary fat. Again, doesn't necessarily mean that dietary fat is evil. It means that it's something that you want to look at if you haven't looked at it already, simply because of the metabolic consequences associated with dietary fat. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please shoot them over to me at david@strongbyelite.com. I look forward to hearing from you. If this was helpful, please let me know. I love making videos like this. If you have any questions, please shoot them over to me, because I always need inspiration and content to help you even further, provide you with more value. Okay, david@strongbyelite.com. Until next time.